This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 11. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. So please stop by the blog and leave a comment if you enjoy today's show. You'll find the show notes for today's episode and all the podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at FertileFriday. So please tweet me as well if you enjoy today's show. So in today's episode, I'm very excited to be talking with Dr. Melanie McDowell. Dr. McDowell is a researcher with the Robinson Research Institute at the University of Adelaide in South Australia. Dr. McDowell's specific research area is in assisted reproduction technologies like IVF and ways of improving egg quality through understanding the basic biology behind egg and embryo development, and also how to select the healthiest embryos. She focuses on oocytes, so eggs, and early embryo development. And today we'll be talking about how aging impacts fertility and the important role that reproductive technologies play for women who are trying to conceive. So Mel is joining us today all the way from Australia. Welcome to the show.
Or should I say g'day, because that's what I usually get asked to say from internationals. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I'm very happy to have you. And so I'd love to just dive right in and find out a little bit about your background and the research that you're doing in this area, and also what inspired you to delve into this area.
From a very, very young age, I've always been what I call a why child. So, Mum, why are the clouds white? Why is the sky blue? Why this, why that? So I guess that started my passion for science. So in terms of my educational background, I've got a Bachelor of Science, an honours degree in reproduction and ovarian development and the role of the immune system in reproduction. And then I was really interested in IVF and assisted reproductive technologies. So I did my PhD within the Robinson Research Institute, specialising in how the egg uses energy. So eggs really like sugars, so how they metabolize the sugars and how that affects how they grow. I did a brief stint running around a field chasing after pregnant sheep for a while, and then I've come back to specialize again in reproduction. So I guess I really love this field in that people think that life begins when a child is born, but we would argue that the 3 months leading up to even conceiving is very, very critical.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because I think it kind of boggles the mind that we're all born with the eggs that we're ever going to have. And so that would technically mean that our mom's health determines potentially the health of our eggs.
Most definitely. There's even evidence saying that your grandparents' health can even affect. So, you are what your grandmother and grandfather ate. So it's a bit scary. Definitely scary.
Wow. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of some of the basics. So maybe we could start by talking a little bit about how pregnancy happens from ovulation to implantation.
Right. So in humans, once every approximately 28 days, but of course there's variations, you have a surge in certain hormones which cause a whole heap of ovarian follicles to start to grow. And these contain the eggs, and the eggs have been dormant for, up to 30, 40 years, depending on how old you are at the time. So these hormones initiate the growth of the follicles. They kind of kickstart the egg to start regrowing. So eggs have half the number of chromosomes that a normal human. So a normal human has 46 chromosomes. So an egg contains 23 and a sperm contains 23. That's how you get that characteristic of your mum and your dad or mixing, etc. So part of this final stages of growth is the eggs getting rid of some of those chromosomes to accommodate the sperm. It grows a little bit in size. It gets all the machinery ready to support the earlier stages of development. So if you happen to have sex about the time that the egg is ovulated, which occurs about midway through your estrus cycle, and you're lucky enough to have a sperm and egg meet together, and considering you've got one egg versus millions of sperm, that seems like quite an impossible task, but it does happen. The sperm and the egg meet together. You want to have one sperm, one egg. Once the sperm enters into the egg hardens up and sends off all these signals. You have combining of the two chromosomes, which then forms this complete 46 chromosome sets. And then the egg starts to divide. So it goes from one cell to 2 cells, 4 cells, 8, 16, etc., until it reaches this critical stage where all the genes turn on. So we call it embryonic genome activation. And then it'll continue to grow until it'll get to a stage where it's ready to implant into the uterus and hopefully stick. So yeah, I guess that's the mechanisms. But in terms of, I guess, what people don't understand is that, so the recipe for a human is like a cookbook that has 46 chapters, and each of those chapters is a chromosome. You have pretty much duplicate chapters, so chromosome or chapter 1 will be in duplicate, so one from your mum, one from your dad. And then within each of those chapters, you've got sentences, which will be genes. And then each gene or each word is represented by something called a base pair. So that's the DNA code or the genetic code per se. Yeah, so really human development is like a recipe book, and you've got to have the right number of chapters, the right sentences, and the right words to create a human. And in terms of what determines whether you're a boy or a girl, that's all to do with whatever chromosome your dad gives you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. The XXXY thing. So we are the X and he's the X or the Y.
Yeah, so a female is XX and a male is XY. So because a female has 2 X chromosomes, we can only ever contribute an X to our children, whereas dads have both an X and a Y, so that you have XY sperm. So really you've got a 50% chance of having an X sperm or a Y sperm. Yeah, contrary to popular beliefs, the timing of the month where you try to conceive babies does not affect this XY thing. If that makes sense.
Oh, sorry. It totally makes sense, because there's so many. I've even read different things that say, oh, the boy's sperm swims faster and dies sooner, and the girl's sperm swims slower. And so if you have sex at this day versus that. So I've heard the same things you're talking about.
Yeah. It's what amazes me is some of the myths about having, what diets. So having a base diet versus an acidic diet, whether that determines the sex, and it doesn't. I've also heard, sort of anecdotal things that people males that work in the army with radio waves tend to have girls, but the general population is 50-50. Unfortunately, there's, really it's up to chance.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, because even to this day, there's still, cultures that believe that it's the woman who determines. So it's good to know the basics.
It's all to do with your partner, really, unfortunately.
His contribution.
His contribution.
Well, in terms of our contribution as the women, let's talk a little bit about egg quality and how that changes with age. So I guess to kind of start us off, when is the best in terms of egg quality? When is the best time? When is a woman's egg quality at the highest in her lifetime?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and there's increasingly a lot of education into reproductive health and knowing when the best time to conceive is. So for women, it's in their 20s. and egg quality starts to decrease late in their 20s. 32, you start to have a decline, but 35, I guess, is what clinicians would class as advanced maternal age. That's when you have a massive increase in the incidences of chromosomal abnormalities, increased risks of problems during pregnancy, increased miscarriages, etc. And the main reason behind that is that us females, and as you mentioned in your introduction, we're born with a finite number of eggs. We can't make any more, and those eggs start to grow in a fetus or in utero when about 3 months after conception. So if, for example, I'm 37 years old, but my eggs are 37 and a half years old. So your eggs are 6 months older than you. So yeah, I mean, biologically, the best time is in your 20s, early 30s, but 35 is I guess, the most common risk cutoff time, I guess, when fertility can really decline. The same with males. I mean, there's a common misconception that, Charlie Chaplin had children into his 80s. But age is a problem for men. I mean, it's not, they've got into their 30s and 40s before fertility starts to decline. But the reason why they have a little bit extra time is that guys produce new sperm all the time. So they have that little bit of a wavering. But the best, I guess the best way to determine when your own personal fertility peak window is to look at your mum. So the initiation of menopause is very hereditary. So similar to the colour of your hair or your height, etc. Check out when your mum went through menopause and take 10 years off that. So if she went through menopause at 55, well, really you should stop trying to have children naturally with your own eggs at about 45. That's sort of the critical time period.
Yeah, it's kind of, I find it to just be kind of a scary thing, and it's something that's not really talked about. I feel like as a woman kind of growing up in this culture, you kind of know, like, I think intuitively, but you don't really know. Maybe you could talk a little bit about even the number of eggs. From my understanding, the number of eggs, say, that you have when you're a teenager is a lot different than the number that you have when you're 30.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, because you ovulating one egg per month, approximately, on average. So 12 eggs per year are being ovulated. On top of that, you are getting a pool of your eggs are growing, but they're just not getting the correct signals to have the final stages of growth. So you'll have a cohort of eggs every month that just don't get the right signals, that aren't quite right to go on and ovulate and hopefully become a baby. So, even you have a lot of your eggs are lost even before you're born. So definitely, as if it's like an exponential decrease in the number of your eggs as you age. So yeah, you just got to think about the age as well as the number and the quality. As a teenager, you would have thousands of eggs to choose from, but then in your 30s or 40s, that just goes down to nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it really interesting, because then you kind of find this out when, because if culturally, we're all kind of trying to get all our ducks in a row. So, we got to go to college, we got to, get a great job, find a great man, buy a house, whatever, everything has to be in place, culturally speaking, for us to have kids. So then, you get to your mid 30s, and then you start trying for the first time, and then you figure all this out. Whereas it turns out the best time to conceive was when you were 22 and you didn't have your stuff together.
Exactly. I mean, the invention of the contraceptive pill, so women having a choice about when they have a choice over their reproductive life, over their when they want to have children. Also, I guess the women having more equality in the workplace, more women going to university or having high-powered jobs, that most people think that, you want to be in a secure place before you should start having children. And I guess with the invention of IVF, people think that, well, if I'm that little bit older, IVF will fix everything. And unfortunately, it's not a Band-Aid.
Well,
Unfortunately, it's not a Band-Aid.
let's talk about IVF. So for the
Right.
listeners who might not be as familiar, we all hear the term IVF, but
Yeah.
what does it mean? What exactly is IVF?
Right. So IVF is a technology part of assisted reproductive technologies, or ART. IVF stands for in vitro fertilization. So in vitro means outside of the body. Fertilization, obviously, the combining of the egg and the sperm. So just in a laboratory, it doesn't occur in test tubes, unlike the common misconception where you say test tube babies. We'll just have specialized dishes where we'll have some liquid that's pretty much salts and energy solutions that we know that the egg likes. Add in some sperm, let it bake, I guess, for overnight, and then hopefully something's happened at the end of it. So that's what IVF is. To collect the eggs, at the moment, women are given higher levels of the hormones that naturally occur every month. It's in a process called hyperstimulation. So that means that more eggs, so between 5 to 10 to 15 eggs will get the right signals to get that initial stages of growth. A clinician will collect those eggs, an embryologist will look at the quality and then do the fertilization. And those embryos that look the best will then be either transferred or frozen down for later.
Okay, and I guess at what stage does IVF become an option? So when a woman's trying to conceive,
Yeah.
at what point is this looked at?
It really depends on the age, I guess. Also the obstetrician, whether there's prior problems. In Australia, it's estimated that 1 in 6 couples have some form of fertility problems, and it's pretty much 50-50 whether it's female or male problems. There is also a large component that is just unknown, unknown reasons. So, if you're in your 20s and you don't have any prior fertility problems, then at the moment it's recommended you try for a year naturally before seeking help. As you get older, obviously that window is a lot lower. So by the time you're in your 30s, really, if you're not conceiving within 6 months or less, you should seek help. Firstly from your general practitioner, and then they will refer you to an obstetrician or a fertility specialist.
Okay, and there's more than one assisted reproductive technology, of course.
Yes.
So what is the difference between, say, IUI and then IVF?
I'm more used to the more in vitro work, so the work that happens in a culture dish, whereas the intrauterine insemination, that is more, you might have some kind of chemical stimuli that helps you ovulate, and instead of normal conception and sex and everything like that, the woman will have the sperm positioned into the cervix and the uterus to assist fertility or fertilization. That can really help where you've got low sperm counts or maybe some mucosa, some physiological problem with the woman. I guess that's it really depends on the case. That's why you really need to see a fertility specialist, because it might be, if you're a little bit older, then they'll recommend something compared to a low sperm count, or it's really by case.
Oh, okay.
In terms of in vitro fertilization, you've got just traditional egg and a million sperm being cultured together and hope everything happens. There's also increasingly another technology called ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where an embryologist will select one sperm and directly inject it into the egg. So that's, I guess, the most common visual that people associate with IVF.
Okay. I have one other question about different types of assisted reproductive technology. So when I was researching for this podcast, I kind of started looking at some of the research you were doing, and I came across IVM, which I hadn't really been that familiar with. So I guess we're kind of going through the variety and finding out the differences. But what is the difference between, I guess, IVM and then IVF?
Yeah. Okay. So IVM stands for in vitro oocyte maturation. So that is it's an up and coming technology that's increasingly being utilised. So in traditional or conventional IVF, women receive these extra hormones. So it's what we call hyperstimulation. So they're receiving the extra drugs to try to have more eggs develop to this final stages. In IVM, you have minimal or no hormone therapy, and a clinician will come in and collect the eggs before they've finished that final stages of growth, and then we'll put them into a culture system and grow the oocytes or mature them to that final stages. So the advantages of IVM versus traditional hyperstimulation is that there are some conditions that are not conducive for hyperstimulation. So PCOS or polycystic ovary syndrome, hyperstimulation can be quite devastating. Also, hyperstimulation itself has problems that it can actually be lethal and in some instances. So really, if you've got a history of not reacting well to hormones, then IVM is an alternative. There's also the idea that when you receive all these hormones, it's not just your eggs that are affected, it's also your uterus and the rest of your body. So if you're doing a transfer, what we call a fresh transfer, so the embryo is collected, it's fertilized, it's ready to be transferred back into the woman, well, she'll have a higher level of hormones than what she would normally see during a normal cycle, and that's not great for the embryo either.
So it sounds like there's a lot of potential benefits when it comes to IVM.
But there's also, I just thought of one of the other reasons why IVM is such a great technology is that if you are single or you're not ready to have children yet, there are increasingly clinics that are offering egg freezing. So traditionally, you could only really freeze embryos and you require a partner for that. And what happens if you're in your late 20s, you haven't met your life partner, you're not ready to have kids yet? Well, you can actually collect your eggs and freeze them down. And this requires this IVM technology.
Okay.
For that to happen.
Well, and you mentioned that it's a new technology. How available is it? Is it common throughout, North America or Australia yet?
Yeah, there are only really a handful of clinics. I guess the country that is utilizing it the most is China at the moment. There's been quite a few people that have gone through this IVM stage. Locally, it's still in the developmental stages of it, but it has large potential. So it's not really widely used at this stage for human IVF.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know because as I was reading about it, I realized I didn't know a lot about IVM at all.
Yeah.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about the success rates of IVF and how it changes as a woman ages, because I know earlier you had mentioned that it's not a Band-Aid.
Right.
How does the effectiveness let's talk, I guess, generally about the effectiveness of IVF.
Okay.
How effective is it?
Okay, so I'm really sorry, but I'm going to be quoting Australian numbers because that's what I'm used to. But there was every year there's a report released that covers all the IVF clinics in Australia and New Zealand. And if you're looking at figures on average of all the IVF cycles that are initiated throughout Australia and New Zealand, about 17 to 18% of all cycles that start result in a live birth. So that is a baby born at the end. So that in itself is there's room for improvement there. But, those numbers would be generally applied to more women in their 20s and early 30s. As you age, that number decreases rapidly. And, offhand, I think by the time you're about 45, you've got less than 5% chance of having a live baby at the end using your own eggs, essentially. So, yeah, it's not something that you can turn around and say, look, I'm in my 50s, but hey, I can use IVF. It's not a fixer. But, I mean, with that in mind, though, a woman in her late 30s to 40s if she uses a donor egg. So that is an egg from a woman in her 20s. Well, she's got the same chance of getting pregnant as a woman in her 20s as well. So really it is the egg quality is a major factor in the success.
Wow. So if you use your own eggs, then of course they're your own age. So then it sounds like the rate of success is based on that. But if you use a donor egg from a younger donor, then it that's pretty, because I feel like what you said is right. Like I feel like people think that with IVF, like you said, kind of just, well, if I need to, it's there. So
it's there. Yeah. Yes.
And it's not that it's not, but that's that's a very stark number at age 45, especially when you see in the media women who are famous, who are really old, and they're getting pregnant with twins and stuff. And so it really makes us all think that, well, if she did it, I can do it too.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the thing is that you don't know what's happening behind closed doors in celebrity world. You don't know whether they're particularly fertile and they're using their own eggs. But I would think the majority would be using donor eggs, the women in their 40s that are getting pregnant. You don't know how many cycles it's taken them to achieve that pregnancy as well. So, there's a lot of behind the scene things that you really don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I even find that nowadays, because when you see women that are pregnant, I think we're at the point now where we can't always assume that it was, natural birds and bees stuff. Yeah. But I think we still do. I feel like we still do. So it's one of those things where sometimes you have to catch yourself. You ask questions and all of a sudden, actually, we had a donor egg. And so I remember one time I asked a colleague, I said, oh, who does the baby look like? And, oh, well, actually, and then I got the story. Because you just don't know anymore. Because you said 1 in 6 couples in Australia are using some sort of. That's a really high. That seems a really high number to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and in the same figures, it's quoted that 1 child per classroom now is from some form of ART, so IVF or some kind of assisted reproduction, and that number is only going to increase. I mean, I'd say it'd be worldwide that the age of first-time mums is increasing. So, and in Australia at the moment, it's about 30 years old is the average age of the first-time mum, compared to a decade ago where it would have been late 20s, or even in the 70s where it would have been early 20s. So I can only see that the use of IVF technologies will just increase as women delay having kids.
Yeah, it kind of seems backwards in a way, right? So from all the research that you've done, I mean, in terms of the impact that aging has, because it's obviously, it seems to set in quite quickly, and then it seems like once it sets in, once you hit that magical age of 35, it's pretty severe.
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing. And so, I guess what message would you want to get out there to women everywhere regarding?
Well, yes, to think about your reproductive health, to have a life plan. We are very good now at, when we go through high school, of having a plan about our education or where we're going to live or that kind of our lifestyle choices. But really, fertility should be included in that. I mean, you can't magically predict when you're going to meet your life partner and when you want to have children, but I think it's really important to have a timeline. So, maybe if by the time you're in your mid to late 20s, if you're not ready to have children, maybe investigate looking at egg freezing, or there are tests now you can do in clinical labs where they can they're called the egg timer test. So they can actually do a biological test that will predict your egg reserves. So, I'd really recommend that people think about this, that have some kind of plan that, by a certain time, if they're not ready to have children, to look at their options. Because by the time you're in your mid-30s to 40s, it's starting to get too late.
Mm-hmm. I just find it so interesting how Not that I'm saying that, I mean, I wasn't ready to have kids when I was 20, so I'm not going there to say people should all go have kids in their but I find it interesting how it's so heavily frowned upon if women that are quite young get pregnant. I mean, for lots of reasons, right? Like 100 different reasons it's frowned upon. But then if you look at grandmas who are in their 90s, they all started having kids when they were 20, right? So 100 years ago, it must have been common to see 20-year-old women with kids because they all did. So it's interesting how in a few generations everything can change, and what we think of as normal now wasn't normal, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, well, again, it's come down to the contraceptive pill is the most common form of birth control. I guess it's empowered women, so you're less likely to have accidents. I guess, also just equality. Like I said, women being in the workplace for longer, having careers, and the careers, working to have a career rather than just working as a means to, until you're ready to have kids and everything like that. So there's a lot of lifestyle factors that have contributed to this delay in having children. And some of them are great, but it's then had the inverse effect of women now having children later, which is not so great.
Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of that idea like that we can outsmart our biology, But the biology, and I think I feel like where this conversation is kind of resonating with me is, it's not that you're determined by your biology. And it's amazing that we live in a time where we have all of these options, right? I mean, it truly is amazing that we have options, because obviously back in my parents' day, some people just didn't have kids. Like if they tried and they couldn't, they were barren, and that was the end of the story. So we're very fortunate to have all of these options. But
definitely.
I think the message that's coming out is you can't forget that biology is a factor.
Yes.
A very important factor.
Yeah, and look, having a poor diet, so being overweight and obese, or smoking or alcohol while you're trying to conceive, we all know that they are things that are bad for pregnancy. So it is recommended when you are trying to conceive naturally to have your lifestyle in check. But unfortunately, there's a common misconception that, say, if you're really fit and healthy and you've had that kind of lifestyle for your whole life, that will make you more fertile. But unfortunately, that's not the case. That it is something genetic. It's something that is determined from your mum about how long your fertility window is. So there are definitely ways of reducing your fertility, but unfortunately, a lot of your fertility is from your mum and from your grandmother and your great-grandmother, etc. So I think that's also another misconception.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, from your research, is there anything, because I guess we're painting a pretty stark picture for women who are getting up there in age. So from your research, are there any ways that we can kind of improve egg quality, or is there anything to that talk about diet? Have you done any research in those areas?
Not personally, but I mean, just as a general thing that I wouldn't suggest you go on a particular fertility diet. I would just say that, look, have a balanced lifestyle. So, your old school food pyramid, I guess. So eat your veggies, but also eat some protein, or, I just think that have a healthy lifestyle. Don't smoke. If you are trying to conceive, well, cut out alcohol or reduce your alcohol consumption. It's just having an overall good wellness plan, I guess. So exercise a lot. Don't be too thin. Don't be too overweight, because also being too thin can also affect fertility. So, as a general rule, just have a healthy lifestyle. Would be the best way.
And kind of be aware of the fact that age plays a role in...
Exactly. Talk to your mum. Find out, how long it took her to get pregnant with you, and when she went through menopause, that will give you a really good idea about your fertility window. Yeah, I mean, I think also being aware of your own body, tracking the time between your menstrual cycles, your estrous cycles, whether they're regular or not, that kind of thing, I think also can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because there's so much information going out around acupuncture and the potential, I guess, link between acupuncture and improved outcomes with IVF. Is that anything that you found in your research, or any comments on that?
Not on acupuncture in general, but I mean, I think from my own personal experience, I found out that the month that I wasn't, that when I started to try to have my children, it was the month that I stopped worrying about becoming pregnant, was the month that I got pregnant. I mean, this is all just personal experience, but I think by having a good lifestyle, by trying to reduce your stress, by, if acupuncture helps you, if you think that it stops your stress levels, then go for it. If you think that yoga is your thing for reducing stress, then go for it. Go to a health retreat, have a healthy diet, exercise a lot, that kind of thing. I think just in general, just have a good lifestyle, I would suggest. If it helps you be happy and healthy, then go for it.
Yeah, I think those are really good words of wisdom, because, of course, there's so much stress that comes with trying, for extended periods of time. And just like you said, as soon as you stopped worrying about, I mean, obviously there's no magical thing that, okay, as soon as, for everyone listening, don't worry and you get pregnant next month. Obviously that's not what we're saying, but it's a good...
it wasn't as if I said to myself, right, stop stressing, and I got pregnant. It's not like that. But I just think that, that was my own personal experience.
But it's good to have that in mind, because there's a lot to be said for the things that we can't explain, the kind of the stress factors. And you always hear those random stories of the couple that's been trying for so long and then they go on vacation, and
yeah. Yes.
So there's things about this, there's things that we don't know. And so I think that the message is good. Living a healthy lifestyle, just trying to do your best and not stressing too much over anything in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the human body is an amazing thing. It's an absolutely amazing thing. And that's why we still have scientists investigating things. We're never going to know everything. And sometimes it's just an amazing thing what thousands of years of evolution has enabled our body to be able to do. And some of it's just unexplainable and magnificent.
It's so true. Well, I have a couple more questions about kind of the aging and the IVF. And one of the things that you had mentioned was as a woman's age increases, kind of because at the very beginning of the podcast, you just did a beautiful explanation of the way that the chromosomes and the egg meet the chromosomes and the sperm, and how it's so important for both components to be healthy. So would you be able to talk a little bit about, I guess, why women at advanced maternal ages tend to have higher instances of chromosomal abnormalities and those types of things?
Brilliant question. This is to do with the idea that no new eggs are created or are made in females, compared to males, which are guys that are constantly producing new sperm. So the egg contains, a complete number of chromosomes, so that's 46, but to accommodate the sperm, it needs to get rid of half the amount of its chromosomes. And for that to occur, the egg contains kind of scaffolding, I guess, which moves the chromosomes around. And so then that means that, you want to have half the set of chromosomes in one region of the egg, compared to the other half in something called a polar body, which is just a little mini structure that sheds the extra chromosomes. So it's really critical for the number of chromosomes to split evenly. So a common thing that happens in older women is something called aneuploidy, which is too many or not enough chromosomes. So, for example, Down syndrome is one of the most common aneuploidies, and that's where you have an extra chromosome 21. So you have 3 chromosome 21s compared to being. So that's an example of where the egg has tried to get rid of the extra chromosomes and something's gone wrong with the mechanisms or the scaffolding, and so one of those chromosomes hasn't been discarded, and then when the egg is fertilized, then you end up with too many chromosomes. So the reason why most chromosomal abnormalities are attributed to the female is because of this reason. But then conversely, males, because they're constantly producing new sperm, are more likely to contribute to a genetic disorder, so a mutation. So people hear about mutations. There's a lot of Hollywood movies talking about mutations being bad or good. So to go back onto my analogy about humans being like a recipe book with chapters and sentences. Well, if you think about a sentence, sometimes a change in letter doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, but sometimes it completely makes the sentence an opposite meaning or a different meaning, etc. So that's the same with mutations. So because the sperm are constantly being produced, then mutations, or what we call de novo mutations from new mutations, occur in males. And again, that is something that increases with aging in males. So older fathers tend to contribute new mutations to their offspring.
I think that's such an important point to make, in the sense that we often think that fertility is kind of within the woman. I mean, even though we know that half the genetic material comes from the father, we still, because we house the baby, we have the visual, the big belly and everything. So it all kind of gets attributed to us. So I think it's really interesting to know how age also affects a man's fertility.
It takes two to tango, and the legacy of the father's health and age, etc., definitely carries through to their children. So, like I said, that aging can contribute to new mutations in sperm, but also the health of dad is increasingly showing to be really important. So if dad smokes, if dad's overweight, if dad drinks, those kind of lifestyle factors also can contribute to the health of their children. So, look, out to your audience, I'd recommend, if you want to have children, make sure both mum and dad are looking after their health.
I think that's such an important, because even I didn't really think about it too much, when I was younger. You just don't really think about stuff like that, which is why I'm doing this podcast, because I feel like we need to open up the conversation. Hi guys, let's eat some vegetables and and take care of our health as well. It's not just up to us.
Yes, exactly.
So I have a few more questions to end the show today, and so about 3 or 4 more. But for women who are struggling with infertility, what advice, if any, would you be giving to them?
Know your body. Be aware of your body. So, track your estrous cycles, so your menstrual cycles, whether they are a consistent length or whether you've got variations or variabilities in that. If you are thinking that, if you are worried about your fertility, well, then see your general practitioner. Talk to people. I mean, I think awareness is a really powerful tool. Look after yourself. Make sure you have a healthy diet. Things, if you are trying to conceive, make sure you have higher levels of folate in your diet. Omega-3s are coming up as being something that are really important for development of the early embryo. So, I guess the checklist would be to look after yourself, know your body. If you have any doubts, talk to your local doctors about it.
And then for, women who are listening who may be currently on the pill, they're not ready to have children right now, but, they know they want to have children at some point in the next few years. What, if any, advice would you give in that case?
Have some kind of plan in your mind about when you would like to have children, and the possibility that if you don't have a partner, what you're willing to do. So, maybe talk to your GP about getting your egg timer test being done, which is an anti-Mullerian hormone test. Just be aware, be aware that age does affect your fertility, and starting to worry about your fertility in your mid-30s to 40s is too late. Have some kind of idea that, if you're not ready to have children, then just be aware that fertility does start to decline in your early 30s. So investigate alternatives if you're not ready to have kids by the time you hit 30, 32, 35. By the time you reach 40, 45, it's too late.
Yeah, I feel like on the one hand, it's kind of like, oh, this is, it's kind of a scary message. But on the other hand, I feel that it's safe to say that there are women in this world who are at the advanced maternal ages in their, early 40s. And you would probably hear the sentiment, I wish someone would have told me. Right?
Exactly. There is a great website that I've been involved with called yourfertility.org.au that explains basic fertility things. So the fact that aging does affect your fertility, that your lifestyle does affect your fertility. So really, knowledge is powerful. Again, there are so many myths about getting pregnant, etc., that they are myths. What we can tell you is what the average population is like in terms of their fertility, and I guess hopefully have that as a guide as to the best way to improve your fertility or improve your chances of getting pregnant, but also options about what you can do if you do want to delay getting pregnant or having children for whatever reason, that there are options you should think about. So really, just be aware, I think is the most important.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really good. And I think to kind of get you thinking about it before, right? Because I think the message that you're saying is don't wait until you're 40 to have the conversation, at least with yourself. And there's nothing wrong with going to your GP and finding out what your options are.
Sure.
Something you said earlier in the podcast is very accurate. We can plan our lives, we try to plan our careers, we plan our weddings, we plan our kids' birthday parties. But when it comes to actually, I think it's twofold. I think that on the one hand, no one anticipates that they're going to have any problem because since the birth control pill, as you said, is this fantastic innovation. And I personally feel that the reason that we're all so gung-ho to take it is because of the years of being told that we could get pregnant at any time. So I feel like there's this whole team pregnancy out there that tells you can get pregnant at the drop of a dime. So after spending 10, 15, 20 years trying so actively to avoid it and thinking that you could get pregnant just like that, you don't realize that during that time your fertility has been changing.
Exactly.
So when you're 20, so I feel like that, exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember the same thing going through high school, that to prevent unwanted pregnancies, you take these certain steps, but no one actually tells you, well, actually, there is a finite amount of time when you are fertile. So, I think that's a really important message. And I think, being in my 20s, I was surrounded by a lot of clinicians and reproductive scientists that from that stage were telling me, no, you've got to have an idea about when you want to start a family, regardless of whether you have a partner or not, because, there is such thing as too late. So I think, I was very fortunate to have that because of the environment that I was studying in, but I think that needs to be more commonplace to the general population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I just have to throw in the irony that during the most fertile years of our lives is when we're taking the pill and actively trying to avoid it. And then during the time that we're nearing, because of course 35 isn't old in the general sense of the world.
No,
and
well,
beautiful women and actresses in Hollywood are looking better than ever. 50-year-olds looking amazing. So there's so much youth and the whole concept of youth, except for the whole egg part. It's what I'm hearing.
There's, unfortunately, keeping healthy and exercising and all that kind of stuff is prolonging everyone's lives, but unfortunately not prolonging their reproduction. Unfortunately, that's pre-programmed by your genes.
Well, scary message, but you're telling it like it is, and it's something that we all need to hear. So as difficult as it might be to hear, all I can say is I would much rather hear it at a younger age than have to find out at an older age. So
Sure.
so Mel, thank you so much for coming on the show. We had an awesome conversation, and I'm so excited to share this with the audience. So how can our listeners get in touch with you or find out more about the research that you've been doing in these areas?
Okay, so as I mentioned, there is a website called yourfertility.org.au, which has a lot of the basic facts about reproduction. So the fact that age is a factor in fertility, as well as lifestyle, etc. I'm also part of the University of Adelaide in Australia and the Robinson Research Institute. So definitely there's a lot of resources there. I also tweet occasionally on reproduction, but also about everything else. So my handlebar for Twitter is at Dr. Mel McD. But really, look, I would really, as much as the internet does have a lot of myths, I would really just, if you are interested, have a bit of a search, look at places like Your Fertility, which are supported by assisted reproductive technology clinics, as well as my own university. Yeah, really look into the credentials of the people that are reporting about fertility. Mm-hmm. Just, be aware, talk to your mum. I think that's a really important thing to see if she had any problems when she started going through menopause, that kind of thing. Talk to your friends as well. Mm-hmm. I think fertility is not really that much discussed amongst your girlfriends. Yeah, but just be aware, I guess. Knowledge is powerful.
Mm-hmm. I would second that. I feel like when you have an experience regarding fertility, so whether that's that you're having challenges or that you have a miscarriage or a few, I feel like that's when all your friends come out of the woodwork, because people don't really volunteer. Sometimes people don't really volunteer it. But if you're in a situation and you share, I have this experience, all of a sudden you realize that you're not alone. But like you said, people aren't really talking about it. So I'll make sure to link all of the resources that you mentioned so that the listeners can find that in the show notes for the episode.
Sure.
Well, thanks again, Melanie. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes. So you'll find today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/Mel, M-E-L. And you can also tweet me at Fertile Friday, and you can find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. So until next time, be well and happy charting.